Hello, welcome to this episode of Rich Insights. I'm Don Rich, the Chief of Investments for Esoterica Capital Management. Today's topic is the state of things. All right. In the course of the last 3 weeks, it's hard to believe. In fact, it's been just shy of 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, we talked about how concerned we were with lofty valuations, and we pointed out a number of the storm clouds that we're starting to assemble. But it's hard to believe in the course of less than 3 weeks, equities have fallen in value about 25%. All of that in 3 weeks. We've got Italy that's essentially closed itself off to the world. Now Ireland's falling. Israel's right in line. And of course we have the travel restrictions in the U.S. And the U.S. is becoming more and more isolated. Right, the NBA season being postponed, the NCAA basketball tournament, right? All the social activities have essentially come to a standstill. A number of the education facilities, right, sending students home. All right, so we're having this tremendous change. All of this happened again in the course of 3 weeks. So let's talk about some of the other things that have been happening. I want to go to the charts first to talk about what's not been happening. All right, this is what I find to be the most interesting. Now on this chart here, what we have is two lines for the last 3 weeks here since the 22nd of February. So the white line is the S&P 500, and the orange dotted line is the Nasdaq. Right, the Nasdaq, the more tech-oriented one. All right, as you saw from that chart, they're virtually indistinguishable, those two lines. Again, let's pull it up again. Let's take a look. Again, from where we started, the up and down days are essentially identical. The reason I find this so amazing is of course, most of the rally that we've seen over the last few years has been due to tech-related stuff. Tech is the crowded positioning, right? I would have felt a lot better had we had some form of capitulation, right? In other words, a tech falling much more than the broad markets, much more than the S&P 500. I'm waiting for the day when the Nasdaq's down 3 or 4% more than the S&P 500. Then I'll at least have some higher level of confidence that things are getting better. Or we might be toward the bottom, at least for the time being. Okay, so start off with what I'm not seeing happening. Again, I'm not seeing NASDAQ underperform like I would have expected to. Let's see. Now, what else has been happening? We've had an emergency rate cut by the Federal Reserve, right? 50 basis points. So it's taken U.S. interest rates to just over 1%. The Bank of England's also cut interest rates. 50 basis points. This morning, the ECB, the European Central Bank, decided not to cut interest rates. Right? It might make you scratch your head a little bit. Well, the reason for that is their interest rates are already negative in the first place. Right? But a bigger issue is the difficulties we're facing cannot be resolved with lower interest rates. So I actually applaud the ECB for not cutting interest rates. Right? I think they did a smart thing. You want to maintain your firepower to when it can have more use. But with the ECB, so they didn't cut interest rates. What did they do? They extended their quantitative easing program. So the QE program was extended by 120 billion euros. All right. A rather large increase, and they're going to focus on buying private debt, private loans, all right, specifically to help smaller and middle-sized businesses. All right, try to keep the smaller companies afloat. To me, that's a bright thing to do. All right, that'll be far more effective than cutting interest rates. Again, I could be wrong, but I thought that was a very smart thing to do this morning. Okay, so that's sort of where we're at, what we've seen. Right? Again, with the U.S. cutting rates, England cutting rates, but Europe deciding not to. The question becomes, where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? Well, I think, the first thing we're going to see is what's called ZIRP, Z-I-R-P, zero interest rate policy, right? We're going to see zero interest rates in the U.S. Even though they're probably not going to have much of an effect, it's softening the blow, we're going to see it. The president's putting so much pressure on the Federal Reserve, the markets are pressuring the Federal Reserve, that we're likely to see them cut another 100 basis points, right? And we're just over 100 today, so the market's pricing in them to cut just about 100 basis points. So we're going to see zero interest rates in the U.S. That's the first thing to expect going forward. The second thing is in terms of quantitative easing, right? Right now in the U.S., the Fed is restricted as to what they can buy through quantitative easing. These have to be government guaranteed securities. All right. Now, what that means is they can buy treasury bonds, and they can buy mortgage-backed securities that are guaranteed by the government. Right. So they're buying treasuries and mortgages today, and they have been, again, through the 4 iterations of quantitative easing, but that's all they've been buying. I think we're going to see an extension of this, right? Quantitative easing in Europe allows them to buy corporate debt. So I think we're going to see some of that go on. But more importantly, quantitative easing in Japan, and only in Japan right now, allows for the Federal Reserve to buy equities. Now, I talked about this before. This scares the hell out of me, but I think it's coming. Right? When the government or government agency, related agency, right, starts buying equities, we are talking about nationalizing our equity markets. But again, I think we're going to see that. So the things I'd expect going forward, again, first is ZIRP, second is expansion of quantitative easing. The third thing is we're just going to see an extension of the social welfare programs, right? Whether this is an extension of the unemployment benefits, a reduction in payroll taxes, things along this line, right? The fact that we're not going out to restaurants, right? We're not taking the cruises. We're not traveling. It's not going to take very long at all before these companies start laying off people. So we're going to have a large increase in the number of unemployed people in the pipeline, and obviously there's going to be some social welfare programs to try to minimize the severity of that effect. So that's the third thing. Now, the fourth thing to expect going forward is going to be related to growth, GDP. I think a recession now is inevitable. Right? It's no longer a question of if and when. It's simply a question of how long is the recession going to last and how deep is the recession going to be when it does arrive. And the answer to those two questions we don't know yet. In large part, it depends on how aggressive the government and the Fed is in trying to implement these policies to remedy the effects of the coronavirus. Right, the expansion of the quantitative easing, the expansion of the social welfare programs, the ZIRP programs that we talked about, and so forth. So all that's going to depend on how bad the recession ultimately gets. But that's what I expect to see happening going forward. Now, the last thing I'd mention is we are in a terribly oversold territory right now. All right, equities are terribly oversold. And so I would expect a relief rally coming here very quickly. Now, whether or not you want to chase that ambulance, that relief rally or not, is up to you. I think that relief rally is going to be what they call a dead cat bounce, right? To me, it's not going to be a relief rally you want to chase. There's going to be another leg lower after we experience a relief rally, right? And that's when I'm going to talk to you about the buying opportunity. All right, so those are my thoughts today. You just experienced a rich insight. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.